Today we welcome our supporting associations and the accrediting bodies SAIBD and SACAP. Today's session is recorded and of course will be made available in the coming days. I encourage you to please post all your questions in the Q&A box and we will tackle as many as time allows. I encourage you to sort of start your engagement by letting us know where you're based and where you're from in the chat box. And we will try and obviously comment as much as possible. We do have 2 hours for today's discussion and you will be able to claim 0.2 credits through SAIBD and SACAP after today's session. You were asked to enter your SACAP registration number on the registration. So those details will be sent through to the accrediting bodies and then you will receive your certificate. So just a reminder, if you are not registered with those supporting bodies, unfortunately, you won't be able to claim CPD accreditation. So while we I think numbers have sort of steadied out, so we can sort of start without leaving anybody out. Before we begin our panel discussion, I'm so delighted to introduce Vusi Palane, who is a professional architect and the chief architect with the Department of Public Works. Vusi is also SACAP's 5th term council member and the chairperson of the Identification of Works. So I don't think there's a better person to sort of give us a quick introduction. So Vusi will give us a nice 15 minutes overview before we begin our presentation. Vusi, thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Thank you, Kelly. It's a real honor for SACAP to be allowed to present at this platform. On behalf of SACAP, we greatly appreciate the opportunity to further consult with all our stakeholders, our RPs and members of the public on the identification of work for the architectural profession. So it's a great honor and we really appreciate this opportunity.
Thank you, Vusi. So I'll leave it to you and I'll see everybody in a moment.
All right, if any of the panelists can indicate whether they can see the screen displayed.
Yes, thank you, Vusi. All is in order.
Thanks, Kelly. All right, so I'll be going through an overview of identification of work. In terms of the content of my presentation, I will only be dealing with the work that has been done by the 4th term interim council and along with the 5th term council, and I'll look at the achievements and engagements to date. I will touch on at a high level on the statutory mandates, the engagements with our stakeholders in the in trying to publish the identification of work policy. I will also report back on the engagements between the Competition Commission and CBE, the challenges we've encountered regarding the X application and the comments from the CC. I would then go into more detail into the identification of work components, the various mechanisms that are available to our RPs, looking high level also at various qualification, project complexities, and then I will conclude my presentation. Okay, so in terms of achievements and engagements to date, the identification of work is informed by the policies that have been displayed on the screen, and these are the CBE Act, the Architectural Profession Act, the Competition Commissions Act, and the Policy on Identification of Work also. So in terms of background, just try and minimize this. SACAP has, in terms of Section 26 of the Act, drawn up the identification of work policy. The initial publication of IDoW was gazetted on the 9th of February 2007, And really the council has consulted widely with all stakeholders and interested parties. In accordance with Section 26, submissions have been made and recommendations made to CBE regarding IDoW and the publication thereof. Brief background, in terms of our act, we have to consult with all our stakeholders. These include VAs, any person, any body in industry who may be affected by the laws regulating the built environment profession. And we have to consult with them so as to inform their identification of work policy. Okay. Once consulted, recommendations are then made to CBE for publication of scope of work. Okay, in terms of Section 26, after thorough consultation, the council must submit recommendation to CBE regarding the work identified as per subsection 1 for consideration. Okay. CBE must, after receipt of the recommendation of the Council of the Professional submitted to it in terms of the Profession Act, they need to liaise with the Competition Commission to determine policy with regards to the IDoW and for various categories of registered persons. And they also need to consult with any person, body or industry that may be affected by IDoW. After consultation, CBE, along with the Competition Commission, they must consult with the councils for the professions and identify the scope of work for every category of registered person. Okay, so just the background of where we come from. On the 12th of December 2017, the Honorable Minister Nhleko had appointed the 4th term interim council. Subsequent to the appointment, I was nominated as chairperson of IDoW, and the committee was then reconstituted. The engagements and achievements I'll be dealing with are from the period of the 12th of December 2017. On the 4th of December, we had a stakeholder engagement. Basically, all the VAs were invited to discuss the IDoW and further consult so that we have an informed identification of work policy. Similarly, on the 2nd of September, SACAP had hosted a voluntary association forum and we consulted further. And really the purpose of this engagement was to allow council to consult widely with everyone who's affected by these regulations in the built environment. In terms of Section 26, subsection 1, subsequent to the engagement with our stakeholders, we requested our RPs to submit comments on IDoW, and these were sent via emails, written submissions were received. So we had received those comments and we developed the prevalent reoccurring questions from the professionals. These frequently asked questions were also displayed on the SACAP website. We had engagements also with the Competition Commission to consult on our identification of work. We had a fruitful meeting at the CC's office, and really the aim of the meeting was to present IDoW and really show the CC that the identification of work isn't exclusionary. We had presented mechanisms such as RPL, special consent, and limited special dispensation, which the CC at the meeting had agreed that these policies do promote transformation in the industry. We are still having some other challenges with regards to comments from the CC. However, on this particular engagement with the CC, we were quite pleased with the outcome of the engagement. Okay, these are, I'm not going to deal so much with it. So it basically demonstrates that various dates we had a consultation with CBE to develop the scope of works for the architectural profession. Similarly, CBE also consulted with the Competition Commission, and both organizations are really at loggerheads, as it seems. There are clear tensions in terms of which act between CBE and CC, which act is superior or prevails over the other. The CC's concerns with CBE scope of work is that it lacks transformative mechanism to address challenges in the industry. You will remember, colleagues, that when CBE had published the high-level scope of work, it was void of all the other mechanisms which I had alluded to earlier. Hence, there seem to have been disputes with the CC. Okay, so in as much as there are clear disputes between CBE and CC, CBE had published a scope of work with SACAP included. The scope of work was published by CBE on the 4th of October 2019. CBE Council also approved the IDoW mechanism for all the CPAP. These mechanisms include RPL, special concert, limited special dispensation, and candidacy. Subsequently, CC had instructed CBE to withdraw the publication, citing that the framework is not transformational. And this really was based on the fact that the high-level scope of work published was void of all these mechanisms. Okay, CBE scope of work on the 14th August 2020, a virtual consultation was held between all the stakeholders, and the meeting discussed the proposed MOU between all the organization to find a resolution to the publication of the scope of work. However, the parties did not agree on an MOU, and we are still consulting further with the CC in this regard. Okay, so SACAP had consulted extensively, and as a result, in terms of way forward, SACAP had published the guideline professional fees on the 17th of July 2020, following consultation with the voluntary association. And the guideline fees has been published in the Government Gazette. In our view, we as SACAP are of the opinion that we have complied with the provisions of the Architectural Act and the Council and CBE. We are of the view that we've consulted extensively with our stakeholders, and subsequent to the webinar we had hosted in September, SACAP received comments from RPs, and SACAP also intends on publishing the identification of work policy within the current financial year. At this stage, I can confirm that the comments have been addressed by the IDoW Committee, and recommendations have been made to Council for approval and publication. As a note, the publication was meant to have occurred by the 1st of July 2005. And to date, 15 years has passed and we haven't really implemented the publication. And as such, the industry itself lacks a mechanism, a control mechanism to ensure that the public is protected and that those who are practicing are doing work according to their competency and qualification. All right, so the next item I'll be dealing with, it relates to the exemption application. I won't really go into much detail here. Essentially, it aims to show the publication on IDoW by the Engineering Council. So on the 20th of January 2016, the CC had rejected the exemption application in respect of IDoW for engineering, regulations, and professional fees. And the reasons which were cited by the Competition Commission was that the IDoW restricted competition between registered and unregistered persons. The CC found that once IDoW rules are implemented, unregistered persons will not be allowed to undertake work or offer services reserved for persons registered with EXA. And therefore, this was found to be an exclusionary act. The second comment from the CC relates to the restriction of competition between persons registered in different professional council within CBE. Okay, the third comment from Competition Commission relates to the restriction of competition between persons registered within CBE and persons registered with professional councils outside both environment. And the fourth comment from the Competition Commission relating to the exemption application relates to the restriction of competition between persons registered with CBE, but different registration categories. Concluding remarks from the CC are that the restriction imposed by IDoW rules will reduce the number of persons operating in the relevant market. Okay. Further, the CC found that existing regulations or legislation in the sector that cater for public health, safety, financial risk, and associated engineering work. The CC further found that IDoW rules are not in line with international best practice. Thus, the degree of regulation of the engineering professions internationally varies. All right, so these are the comments and justification from the CC on the exemption application by CBE. Okay, so now I'm moving into the identification of work policy itself and how it is informed by the competency and the educational qualification which one obtains from architectural learning sites. Right, so in terms of the Constitution, Section 22, it grants every citizen the right to choose their trade, occupation, profession, and as such, practice of trade, occupation, or profession may be regulated by law. Okay. Further, Section 24 grants everyone the right to an environment that is not harmful to their health or well-being. Section 19, subsection 2 of the Architectural Act, the council must register the applicant in the relevant category and issue a registration certificate to the successful applicant in the prescribed form. This is after having considered the application, the council is satisfied that the applicant can demonstrate competence as measured against the standards determined by council for that relevant category. And the applicant needs to have passed an additional examination that may be determined by council. Section 19, subsection 4 of the Act, for the purpose of this section, prior learning means previous learning and experience of a learner, howsoever obtained, against the learning outcomes required for a specified qualification and acceptance for the purpose of qualification of that which meets the requirements. Okay, right, so this slide here is very important for our RPs out there. And really, I'm going to stress the point that it's important because it's going to alleviate the distress and worries which our RPs are currently concerned with. The mechanisms, the three mechanisms we've allowed in the identification of work policy relates to recognition of prior learning. It talks to special consent, limited special dispensation. Recognition of prior learning is really an upgrade per category. So if one is a professional draftsperson, an RPL upgrade reflects to one moving from draftsperson to a technologist level. This is not a qualification, so we are not giving our RPs credits which may be used at an architectural learning site. What SACAP would issue once acquired an upgrade via RPL, you will get a SACAP certificate, which demonstrates that one is competent to do work in the next category. Special consent is specifically have been practicing in the past outside their category of buildings, and really here one would be granted permission to do that specific work once they've been assessed and proven that they are competent to do that work. Limited special dispensation is intended for registered principals, and similarly here, it's for those who practices or principals who've been doing work outside their scope, and they'll be granted consent to do such work. Okay, the slide that's displayed on screen relates to the three mechanisms, and in terms of evaluation or assessment, one would need to present the portfolio of evidence, and they'll be evaluated, and permission or consent will be granted to the professional, the principal who's intending to do that specific work. The identification of work policy, once published, it's really intended for new entrants into the industry. So it's not really for those who have been practicing for years and are competent in that specific type of work. IDoW is mainly created to ensure that new entrants, newly qualified candidates they can do work that has been allocated to them in terms of their competency and their training and experience. So really, this slide is important in that it alleviates the concerns of our RPs out there. And I would really appeal to our RPs that they need to read through the policy itself so they can appraise themselves on what are the mechanisms that are available to them to upgrade or be allowed to do specific work types. This slide here talks to the various qualifications and really the various categories of registration aligned to your qualification. And you will note the previous B-Arc of 5 or 6 years. According to SACAP, it's equivalent to the M-Arc Prof, although the NQF levels are different, but these are viewed as equivalent and similar, and both candidates, they receive, they are regarded as professional architects. Okay, so this is a slide that talks to the various qualification and the category of registration. Okay, the next section I'll be dealing with, it talks to project complexity relating to IDoW, and how the various categories of buildings have been informed by the 10 SACAP competencies and the qualifications. Okay, so this is an introduction of concept of project complexity. When was complexity determined for each category of professional? All right, so as early as the first IDoW in 2007, the complexity of the project, square meterage and site sensitivity was then first developed. However, the current IDoW framework is entirely new. It is not a revision of the previous framework as outlined in the board notice. And the fundamental differences here is the interpretation of complexity, which disregards the square meterage and relates to factors that determine complexity of different building types. Complexity factors. Okay, here are the 6 complexity factors, and these are utility, structure, building technologies, building services, urban context, occupational health and safety. Okay, the first complexity factor refers to the use of program of a building, and the utility in terms of complexity varies. Single use would be a simple program, multi-use would be more complex, mixed use, designed to accommodate a range of service of users. The next complexity factor relates to structure, and this is support system and elements of a building and key design informants. And similarly, structure in terms of complexity varies in terms of single story, multi-story, and non-conventional structures. So these are, in terms of complexity, a single story is most, conventional, whereas multi-story are more complex, and non-conventional requires a rational design. Building technologies refer to the various building systems, method, and materials, and these similarly are, classified in the different complexities. Building services, coordination are critical design informants. Okay, so similarly here, the complexity has been, structured as according to various classification. Complexity factor for urban context, similarly, there's various complexities relating to urban context. And the last one, occupational health and safety, relates to the design and specification of the building safety during construction. And professionals need to be aware of the Occupational Health and Safety Act regulation. Okay. Okay, project complexity rating. These are the 3 project complexity rating. A for high complexity project, B is a medium complexity project, and C is that of a low complexity project. Low complexity projects refer to simple buildings or groups of buildings. These are very basic, simple structures that do not require a very experienced RP to resolve. So they are very simple in nature. Medium complexity projects are buildings or groups of buildings which are uncomplicated, medium impact. These are non-complex, just average building types. And whereas high complexity projects, these are large, complicated groupings of projects, and they generally have a significant impact and are regarded as high performance, sophisticated, and specialized building types. Okay, this slide here indicates an example of the two building types. The first is a surface car park, and the second is an underground multi-story car park. So you'll see on the surface car park, it's a low complexity building and does not require sophisticated design to resolve. Whereas a multi-story underground car park is high complexity and needs may require rational design to resolve such a building. Okay, here's an overview of competencies and skills required to perform architectural work. How is competency therefore defined for each category of professional? The competency and skills required to perform architectural work, there are mainly two. This is academic training and practice-based experience. All right, so the first frame of reference relates to your qualification. And the second frame of reference talks to the 10 SACAP competencies, which one needs to demonstrate that they've achieved so that they are granted permission to do those. Okay, the competencies must allow an architectural profession to compete and operate internationally. This requires considerable benchmarking with competencies set out by other international validation agencies. What is the terminology for describing the required level of learning proficiency for each category of professional? Okay, so as according to the 10 SACAP competencies, the learning level, there's 4 of them. One needs to demonstrate the awareness, the knowledge, understanding, and the ability to apply their knowledge. Okay, what are some of the examples of competency for each category of professional? Okay, we'll look at 4 of them. Here are the 4: architectural design, environmental relationship, construction technology, and building service. So on the first one, which talks to architectural design, you will see an candidate architectural draftsperson. They only need to demonstrate the knowledge of the first competency, whereas an architectural technologist, they need to demonstrate the knowledge, understanding, ability to perform such work. Senior architectural technologist, there's a further requirement on their part to demonstrate that they have the ability to do some of the competencies. And similarly with a professional architect or candidate, there's a further requirement on their part to resolve complex structures. For the second competency, similarly here, the architectural professional needs to demonstrate a better understanding and the ability perform such work, whereas on the extreme, the draftsperson needs to only demonstrate an awareness of performing such work. Okay. Similarly, on competency 3 and competency 4, there's more requirement on the architectural RP to perform and demonstrate the ability to do the work. Okay, how are the education, competencies, and complexity factors for each category of professional aligned? Okay, alignment of the education, competency, and complexity factors. All right, so there are various categories of registration, and the two determining factors for assessment is the academic training and practice-based experience. Okay. All right, you will note that the architect, for the various complexity factors, you need to have a higher complexity to be able to perform such work, whereas the architectural draftsperson, there's low complexity rating to perform work for the various complexity factors. Okay, the competencies and skills required to perform architectural work. Okay, relationship of the professionals, education, competence, project complexity factors, and building type is shown in Schedule 1, complexity ratings of building types. Okay, so similarly here, a sample project complexity, a surface car park and a multi-story car parking. A surface car park, which is very simple and requires as a complexity rating of a C. As a multi-story underground car park, is of an A. Okay, so in summary, project complexity and professional competency. A high level of project complexity will require a corresponding greater level of professional competence. Okay, complexity and competence scenario, car park 2. All right, so here's an example here of how the complexity factors determine which category of registration does which specific work type. Okay. Okay. So for a surface car park, which is low complexity, in general, would be done by a draftsperson, and whereas a more complex underground car parking would be done by an architect and senior architectural technologist. Okay, so here the scope of matrix itself, it indicates the various complexities and the ratings, and also demonstrate for various registration the applicable building type that's done by that registered professional. So in this case, a surface car park can be done by all categories of registration, and whereas a multi-story underground car park can be done by, all right, I'm almost done. All right, so here's a low complexity project which demonstrates a surface car park which can really be done by any category of registration, whereas a high complex structure such as this type of car parking would require a higher competency, and that to be done by a senior architectural technologist and an architect. Okay, thank you. That's my presentation, and we'll be answering.
Thank you so much. Before I tackle some of the questions, I just want to let everybody know that today's session is recorded, and Vusi's presentation will be made available as well as the recording in the coming days. Please post all your questions in the Q&A box for Vusi and of course our panel, which we'll introduce in a moment, and we'll tackle as many as time allows. As you do, it may be very nice to please state your professional registration along with your question. So I would like to invite, before Vusi, I just tackle one or two of these questions with you now. I would just like to invite our panel to please switch on their videos so that we could welcome some of our panelists for today. Vusi, some of your questions has already been answered by your colleague, Danashwa. But before we begin to introduce, I would just like to ask the first question that came in. Helena from Bloemfontein, did the competition explain why the view of the identification of works as exclusionary into transformation? I'm sorry, I'm just reading the question.
Yeah.
Do they understand that in order to transform the industry, it must remain a lucrative business to attract new youth?
Thank you, Kelly, for the question. Look, we as SACAP are of the view that the Competition Commission may be missing the point here, because we feel we've complied in terms of the Act, we've complied in terms of consultation and making recommendation to CBE. Now, the Competition Commission's position regarding the exclusionary to those who are practicing, they think that those who aren't registered with SACAP should be allowed to practice. And in our view, unregistered persons, as per the Act, you can't really allow them to practice, because as the regulator, we are here to protect the public, and we need to make sure that whoever designs a building, that they are competent and they are qualified to do so. So in relating to the industry being exclusionary, the CC feels that by by declaring certain building types to be done by certain categories, you are now not allowing those various categories to do work, specific work types that they are qualified or competent to do. And that's not necessarily the case. All that the regulator is doing is to protect the public and ensure that we have competent persons practicing architecture. I hope that clarifies the query.
Thank you, Vusi. We've got a number of professionals joining us on the panel this morning. So before I start the discussion, I just want to introduce everybody. We have Mr. Salvan Reddy, who will chat in a moment, who is the National President of the SAIBD. We also have Mr. Danashwa Bastu, who is an Identification of Work Committee member. We have Videsh Budu, who of course is very well known to these digital talks. Videsh, of course, is the National Vice President of SAIBD and a professional architect and technologist that has been actively involved in the transformation and education of the industry and its professionals. And last but definitely not least, we have Dr. Yashian Lukan, who is an architect. Can I make a quick
correction, Kelly?
Yes, certainly, Videsh.
Professional architectural technologist. Sorry, I know you're not in the industry as such, so
thank you.
for action.
Thank you, Videsh. And of course, as I mentioned lastly, we have Dr. Lashian Lakun, who is an architect and academic involved with research on alternative transformation of professional education, including RPL. He's also the former president of SACAP and a member of the SACAP Identification of Work Committee. I just want to ensure that Selvin has an opportunity to just share his thoughts on the matter as the president of SAIBD. Selvin.
Thank you, Kelly. Good day to Kelly as to our moderator, our SACAP representatives, Mr. Vusi Polani and Mr. Daneshwar Bastu, Dr. Yashin Lakan, my cyber colleague, Mr. Videsh Buru, and our viewers. I'm Salvan Reddy, the president of Cybert and a registered architectural technologist. The services I provide is architecture, interiors, planning, responsible building design. We've adopted a policy of non-discrimination and social commitment. Our empowerment strategy is based on the principle of genuine action to the education and development of students, with ongoing mentoring and collaborating with emerging practices. My experience is based on educating myself through the research and advice/discussions from local authorities, town planners, engineers, and other senior professionals. I've gained the knowledge through various projects that I have completed. Due to my social economic challenges, once qualified, I needed to work to sustain the household, hence unable to further my studies. As a newcomer, my perception of architecture was to design and gain approvals from local authorities only. Through various challenges, I've learned that there is far more to architecture than just gaining approvals. Due to my ignorance, I always had a negative. So through Cybert and their dedicated board, I got to understand more about SACAP and the industry. That's the value of being a member of a voluntary body. Whilst working independently, I was underpricing projects for sustainability and later learned about the negativity I created in the industry. When I started my practice, all the unknown expenditure came to be. I was forced to re-examine perspectives and align myself to market rates. Further to this, I got to understand the regulations better. I am an architectural technologist that has the competency to do work outside my category of registration. Having understood the IDoW document and the various mechanisms that would be available, I asked of SACAP, how would you guide myself and other professionals of a similar nature to understand, to utilize the mechanisms and to give consideration for those that are registered in the lower categories with years of experience and are not aligned with formal education. Also bear in mind that there are draftsmen that are doing, as much as they go into undertaking RPL, there will be limitations in terms of the scope of work that will exist with RPL. Which would be the best mechanism for us to utilize?
Thank you, Mr. Reddy. You know, the brief background you've just given here, we deal with it a lot when we do the RPL assessments. And we do recognize that there are, you know, serious impediments and challenges for our RPs to do work and you know, and work within the market. The best viable option I can recommend to you, Mr. Reddy, is to apply for a category upgrade. Clearly, you've, you know, based on what you've alluded to earlier, you seem to have the competency and the experience to perform such work that is outside your scope and category, and you can bring forth your portfolio of evidence for an RPL assessment. And once you've satisfied those requirements, you would then be upgraded to the next category and be allowed to do various building types which are done in a higher category. So I do share your concerns, and SACAP is really we are very passionate about transformation in the industry, and I would also appeal to all our RPs out there, whomsoever wishes to upgrade to the next level, please apply, and so that we can assess whether you're competent, and we can then upgrade you to the next registration. Though that an category upgrade is not a architectural learning site qualification. You will be allowed to do work of a higher category. You won't be given credits to further your studies at university, but you'll be allowed to do work that's done by a higher category. So that's the best viable option that I can recommend. If you look at the other mechanisms, such as limited special dispensation and special consent, those look particularly at a certain building type, and they don't really have the opportunity to do all the various building types for the next category. So I would really recommend you go for an RPL upgrade, sir. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lucy and Selvin, for your comments and for answering that question as well. Yashin, there's been quite a few questions in our question and answer box. And as an academic, I just wonder if you could share your thoughts on the identification of works.
Okay, thank you, Kelly, and thanks, Lucy, for the presentation. When I look at this identification of work, it's very similar to the 2015 identification of work that was withdrawn because of certain, as Lucy mentioned as well, anti-competitive clauses, or what was deemed to be anti-competitive. So we're looking at the 2020 version. What I see different is there is some mention of the transition clauses under 6.11 of the 2020 version. However, I'll raise an issue that I have from an academic point of view is when we talk about RPL, we talk about special consent and special dispensation, limited special dispensation. And all of those things refer to submission of a portfolio for assessment. My fundamental concern is, what are the measures to ensure that that process of portfolio assessment, whether it be for RPL, special consent, or limited special dispensation, are quality assured, one, and then secondly, are fair, transparent, consistent, and rigorous. So what are the measures? Okay, so if a candidate or an RP had to present a portfolio, what's going to happen to that? Okay. Secondly, where I find a bit of a problem, I'm also going to try to be constructive. I'm not just being critical, but a cart before horse, because those transitional provisions should have been actually implemented. So I'd also like to know in the past 5 years, 3 years, 2 years, or ever, how effectively were those mechanisms implemented, and what's the kind of time lag for somebody that had to apply to it? So from an academic point of view, I have issues with actually how these things are assessed to be rigorous, fair, consistent, and transparent. Thank you.
Adesh, perhaps you'd like to comment on what Yashin has just mentioned. And as of course, you've given our part one of the identification of work digital talk about a month or two ago. So I'm sure you've got a few comments from what our our panelists. Thank
I
you.
apologize. I apologize. I should know better because I've done quite a few of these digital talks, so apologies. I'm going to say it's going to be a bit more, a few comments. And to contextualize my views here, I'm going to give a quick historical background on myself. So I'll make the story a little bit personal. So, more than 30 years ago, I studied at the old DUT. Obviously, it was pre the democratic era of South Africa. Passed all the examinations, no chance to do in-service training. I'm not going to pick on apartheid or anything like that, but let's just say there was no chance to complete in-service training. So an incomplete qualification due to the times. Okay. Since then, mostly worked in multidisciplinary companies, engineering mostly, and some really large companies. Having done work that, if I look at the current IDoW and the tables, is reserved only for architects, from large industrial complexes to large housing complexes and offices, etc. So the question then is, how did I even manage to do that? Because I'm not under the old 500 square meter rule from the 1970 Architectural Act, I was not allowed to do that. And then over the years when the IDoW was enforced, I was not allowed to do that. So the thing is that under the old 500 square meter rule from the 1970s Act, Durban, eThekwini, now known as eThekwini, was the one city that ignored the 500 square meter rule. It's a common known fact. Anyone could do any work in Durban. And therefore, anyone with whatever qualification or registration you had, I'm talking about the old prior 2000, could do any kind of work in eThekwini. And then during the years when, and currently the IDoW has been withdrawn, not yet published. Yes. So I'm declaring that I have done these kinds of work. And obviously, under the two separate laws. The point I want to make is, under the old 500 square meter rule, eThekwini ignored that. I'm not going to go into the legal matters of that right now, but that was happening in Durban. The question is, has society failed in Durban? Has architecture failed in Durban? So, as I said, I'm making the statements to contextualize a few of the issues I have. Now, again, as I said, this is a personal story. So then the question this leads to is, what is the intent? What is the intent of the Act? Why does Act 44 of 2000 even exist? Why does the IDoW Act even exist? And I'm not a legal person, but I generally have a preamble basically, and Act 44 or the 1970s Architectural Act doesn't have a preamble. And we can all say it's fairly obvious reasons why the 1970s Act even exists. It was for discriminatory purposes. Having said that, if you read the 1970s Act and Act 44 of 2000, it's fundamentally the same. And therefore, I sometimes use the words, well, the IDoW can be regarded as a reservation of works. That's how it was referred to in the 1970s Act, because if you read the two, they're actually the same. So that's to contextualize some of the issues. If I go directly into the problems and the questions, there was a lot of questions from our previous webinar we had on this topic. And to summarize some of those questions and my thoughts is, for example, the limited special dispensation for the missing middle. Will it, for example, allow me, since I've done a lot of large industrial and office blocks, will it limit me going forward to only office blocks and industrial buildings? Or will it allow me to do work in the category that those buildings actually fall under, which is senior architect? So the question is, will it allow me to do work that's reserved for the senior architect? Or sorry, for the professional architect? Or will it say, in your portfolio, you only got 3 building types and you can carry on doing those 3 building types? And if the second scenario is true, then I'm going to say that it is discriminatory. While on the topic of the limited special dispensation, I could be mistaken here, but anyone in the legal field can maybe confirm this. I think it's Paja that basically says if any new law that comes into play is going to affect my livelihood, it must not, there must be a transition phase, or must be a transition provision, which the current IDoW has a provision, which is good then, if you think about it that way. But then the problem comes is, then I must not be able to, or I must not pay for it. The LSD must then be free to me, because now you are putting in a law in place that's then discriminating against me. And then you're asking me for a fee to actually come back on my feet. So I'm saying that should be provided free. As long as you can prove. Sorry, Kelly.
No, thank you so much. I just want to ensure that we tackle some of these questions as we're getting quite an overwhelming amount. And something I'd like to pose to all panelists, and Daneshwa, I know you haven't been given a chance to give your thoughts yet, but I know that you have been able to answer some of the questions that have come in for Vusi. But to all panelists, and I suppose the first person who can raise their hand will answer, it's quite an interesting statement that one of our attendees has made. And they've said this issue seems to be similar to the health profession. Would you allow a nurse to operate on you, for instance? And I wonder if someone could comment on that interesting statement.
Kelly, I think we're going to miss the point if we, as the questions are unfolding, from Yashin and Videsh, we need to try and attempt to answer, because if we keep on jumping around, we're actually going to lose our frame of thought. Now, I'd like just to go back and answer Videsh's one when he speaks about the preamble. When you read the Act, it says, to provide for the establishment of a juristic person to be known as the South African Council for the Architectural Profession, to provide for the registration of professionals, candidates, and specific categories in the architectural profession, to provide for the regulation of the relationship between the South African Council for the Architectural Profession and the Council for the Built Environment, and to provide for matters connected thereto. It may not be worded as a preamble, but that was the intent when we transitioned from the Architects Act of 1970, taking into account that we had a bill in 1999. So at the time when this act was drafted, maybe they were not accurate in specifying the word, the preamble, but the intent of this act is very specific. And in terms of your your qualification, it says that it needs to be measured against an outcome. So SACAP has not done anything irregular. They followed what was in the Act, and we're saying that the Council has been following the Act as it prescribes certain outcomes. So we need to be careful how we frame our questions. Whilst everyone has a right to their own personal opinions, but the Act was very specific in how SACAP goes about identifying work and the mechanisms that needs to be provided for in these processes. And then I hand it over back to you, Kelly. I'm not sure how you plan to proceed. I know you did say that you're new to this kind of thing, but we actually need to have some kind of order so we don't get distracted or lose our frame of thought.
Absolutely. And thank you for each panelist for giving your sort of thoughts on the identification of works. And while I'm not an architect myself, we are, of course, creating and organizing an event in the built industry. So we do look forward to that for next year. I wonder if we could start with some of the questions that have come in. And although it's not following a particular order, yes, Busi.
Thank you, Kelly. There was a question from Dr. Larkin earlier. I just wanted to provide some clarity so that we can proceed with further questions. There was a query regarding the measures that have been put in place by SACAP to ensure that the process of assessment is fair and transparent. There was also mention of whether the mechanisms are, based on the previous 5 years, whether these are, they've been tested, are they successful or not? Okay, so we had a consultation with SACWA, and really based on that engagement, they had indicated that the process of RPL and the other mechanisms is really a SACAP initiative, and there isn't a prescribed way to deal with the assessment. However, as SACAP, we have developed some provisions that deal with ensuring that the process is transparent and fair. And these include that when one is assessed, there will be the panel will be chaired by a similar category as the applicant or a higher category. We also recognize representation in terms of gender. So if an applicant is female, the chairperson is likely also to be female. There's an appeal process. If the applicant is not happy with the outcome, they have an option to appeal, and the appeal will be heard by council itself. And really, the assessment process is a peer review. You are assessed by your peers, to ensure that you are compliant or you are competent with the various competencies, the 10 SACAP competencies. And we also look into the various work stages, whether you are fully involved, from inception all the way to close out, to check whether one is experienced or not. Okay. All right. So in terms of the mechanisms, sorry, Kelly, these have not been in place for the previous 5 years. They were only approved by council in this current year. RPL assessments are ongoing. Limited special consent and special consent have not yet started because IDoW has not been published yet. But once it's published, those policies are in place to ensure that we will be able to implement. Thank you, Kelly.
Dr. Yashin, I know you've been raising your hand and we've mentioned the RPL, so I know that you might want to comment on what Vusi's just stated.
I've done extensive research on RPL, and the first time we presented RPL to SACWA, it was I who presented it. RPL has to be a very rigorous, quality assured, fair and transparent system. But okay, that was a comment. We didn't expect a response now. But I think also we've taken a lot of time from the panel side of view, and there's a lot of questions that we need participants to give them a chance to ask questions without necessarily having lengthy responses to every single question. Because I wanted to hear from, it's 12 now, at 1, the session closes, and it's just not fair to the participants. That's what I have to say.
Thank you very much. We do want to ensure that the objective of our discussion is to ensure that we give our audience members some clarification on the identification of work so that we assist them with their queries. So we do want to tackle some of our questions and with the shortest responses possible. And of course, if you do, as for the panelists, if you do have to add anything, please do. Dr. Yashin, before you, and I see you've just muted yourself again, but there has been a question that's come through for you around, and Vusi, you may have just touched on this. Somebody from the founder of Freedom Architecture Consulting Empowerment, FACE, has asked, how do you think or understand this identification of works will affect the disadvantaged?
Okay, and that's being, I mean, you're directing that to me because of the work I'm doing on redress and spatial transformation. Yes. Okay, and that's where it goes back to these transition clauses. We need to have those things very clear and explicit and communicated to the entire profession prior to the IDoW becoming effective. If we are sitting here and trying to answer questions related to those things, it means that those mechanisms have not been fully communicated and not fully resolved as yet. Vusi did the state as well. But so my response would be, first, let's start with enabling mechanisms. Get those right. Get them to comply with what's to be fair, etc. Make sure that they're implementable in a reasonable time and at a reasonable fee. So I think that needs to start before the IDoW can have any effect. I must state, though, that I'm in support of an IDoW, not necessarily this one, but it can't be free for all in every category of registration being able to do anything they feel like. However, there must be some enabling mechanisms to allow fairness. Thank you.
To all our panel, yes, Videsh.
Okay, so thanks, Yashin, for pointing out the time and having a quick peruse at the amount of questions that came in. So yes, we need to, we should have actually allowed like half a day or more. But with the limited time we have, two quick points before we go to the balance of the Q&A. When I was trying to explain about the preamble, the aim and justification of why the Act actually exists, that's not explained, number one. And number two, some simple things. For example, who shall register? Define what practicing architecture is, you know. So I'm saying there's a few fundamental problems that needs to be addressed. And again, fundamentally, I'm here to help assist. I'm not here to fight anyone. I'm saying we need to address this to government there. Right? There is a problem. If I hire a draftsman, am I legally bound to register them? And that question was raised about 5 or 6 years ago. And Dr. Lakan, Mr. Basdeo, and other members were sitting in that panel when this question was raised, and it's still not defined or still not explained. So those are the kind of questions I was alluding to. Due to time, I'm going to stop there and maybe go on to Q&A.
Vusi, from somebody from government or Daneshwa, yes. Did you want to comment on?
Hi, Kelly. I think this conversation is becoming problematic because we're throwing, statements and then we're drifting away from it. And I'm not sure.
Yes,
Well,
We
what
do,
is
of
the
course,
intent of?
yes, so we do, of course, have a number of things to discuss within the next
Yes.
45 minutes. And of course, again, our objective is to sort of assist our audience members who are here today and ensure that they gain clarification on the identification of works. And I wonder if I could just give the opportunity before we go to the next question. Videsh, you mentioned, the issue regarding government. Vusi, with your background on this, could you maybe just clarify?
Can you clarify the question? I missed.
Yes, no problem. Videsh, would you
Okay.
just mind repeating that?
Okay, so the point I raised about the preamble, and yes, there is a kind of the aim is written down in the Act. The thing is, the preamble must contain a justification. If you read Part A of NBR, it justifies, it tells you what the outcomes must be, etc. In a very simple one-pager. The Architectural Act doesn't do that. And I'm saying we need to actually address this with government, the Department of or NDPW, because they are the overseers of the Act. And there are some problems. And I'm saying we need to address these problems to government then. I hope I've explained myself, Vusi.
Yes, look, I acknowledge the comment you're making about the Act. It is it's a worthy comment. I think perhaps if you can make these recommendations to council, whether if we have if we are able to further review the Act. It is a statute of the law, and I'm not certain how how the Act can be reviewed. But I would gladly welcome comments and can refer them to council for consideration. And once we are in engagement with the minister, we can raise those concerns. But at this stage, it's provide the comments, then we'll consider it later. I hope that assists Mr. Bodu. There's not much on my side. Okay.
To our panelists, there are quite a few questions around fees. And I just wonder if we could tackle our first question that came through on why the identification of works, why would it be divided up according to competency, but CPD point allocation and SACAP annual fees are not? Vusi, you don't seem to like that question very much.
Yes, Kelly. The question is not quite core to the identification of work policy itself, as it touches on CPD and the annual registration fees. Look, I do not know why there's discrepancies in terms of the fees which are paid by various categories and the CPDs. Perhaps I can raise this with the applicable committee and revert back with a satisfactory comment. But at this stage, I really don't know why there would be such discrepancies.
Right.
Thanks, Kelly.
There is a question around, as an employee of some big firms, while doing these projects, one doesn't get experience in how to deal with high complexity buildings. only once a professional has branched off on their own do they gain experience. Surely SACAP, if possible, can assist in trying to assist with candidates regarding competencies. Salvan, did you want to comment on such a question?
Can you please repeat that for me?
Yes, certainly. The question is really around, trying to assist with candidates regarding competencies. So it seems that only once a professional has branched off on their own, coming from a very big firm, will they gain experience.
I believe it's not necessary, because majority of your experience is gained at an office environment. We've trained a lot of students over the years, and that your competence on your own. It's a lot more challenging on your own to gain competencies. Thank you.
So there's another question that's just been, more of a statement that was made earlier regarding the health profession, and somebody's just commented on that again. This issue seems to be similar to the health profession. Would you allow a nurse to operate on you? Is there someone who can comment on such a statement like this? Yashin, I can see your eyes were getting quite big at that comment.
This is a comment that's been going around for a long time. Okay, so I want to ask a counter question, right? Were nurses ever allowed to do the work that doctors were doing within the communities? So I'm just going to respond to that with a question. Thank you.
Thank you, Yashin. All right. There's somebody who has a... Yes, Videsh.
Sorry, I want to expand. Thank you, Shen, for answering that. And I want to expand a little bit on it. And I'll just plant some new ideas. That it's not the same as the medical industry. And that argument should not be brought on the table. And I think I made this statement before on a public platform. And anyone can go and Google it right now. But if I immigrate or go and live and find a job in Britain or the UK, it's easier for me to become an architect via, I'm going to use the word RPL, recognition of prior learning, but there's mechanisms there that are in place that I can do it. But here, my home country, the country that I love, it seems too difficult, or it seems for me to get from technologist to architect is going to take me another 5 years, if not longer, and cost me a real big packet. So I'm stopping there with that comment.
Thank you, Videsh. Please go back. Applicable for upgrading, and what is the timeline for such? Perhaps somebody from SACAP. Danashwa, are you able to answer?
Okay, I think they need to be specific. Are they talking about the RPL fees or the special dispensation fee or the limited special dispensation fee? Because the RPL fee, the RPL process comes with a fee. I believe that the RPL policy, special dispensation policy, and the special consent policies can be tabled at council in November when they meet for. So the previous query regarding the status of the three policies. So in terms of giving you fees, it's up to council. They're going to determine the fees. But we at the IDoW committee, when we initially met, we said that the fees for LSD must be minimum. So basically, we discussed an administrative fee that was very low. So however, I'm not committing to that. We're going to allow the council to discuss that in November, provide the feedback to the registered professionals. But I am sure that the LSD, as Videsh spoke about PAJA and unfair practices, I believe that the LSD is facilitative and enabling, and I think that the fees as well will not restrict people from undertaking that process. The whole idea of the LSD was to open up. So we discarded the term the missing middle. We've opened it up to everyone who's going to be affected by the implementation of the IDoW. So whoever is practicing out there and is going to be affected by the implementation of the IDoW, they will submit a portfolio. That portfolio has a rubrics. Now, we've used the rubrics that Dr. Yashen Lakan has implemented a while ago. As well, there's an assessment scale. And when we look at these things, it's I'm just deviating a little bit, but just giving you some background in that it is not a free for all. There is a rigorous method. We even had other VA saying, listen, we're going to monitor and scrutinize this process to make sure that it is not a free for all. And I've seen the documents. I've seen the assessment scale. It speaks about the Bloom's taxonomy, and it speaks about the pedagogy of learning outcomes, and it is aligned. And I think we must, to the academics out there, or to anyone who's fearful that this process is a free for all, it is not. It is facilitative. It is enabling, and when we look at the outcomes, it is measurable against outcomes, based on NQF. However, the fees, I cannot give you exact fees now. We're saying let this be tabled at council, let it be discussed at council. I'm sure VUSI will be able to take this message across and say, listen, there were some concerns at this event where people raised a concern about fees, and I'm sure he'll be able to motivate that the fees be reasonable or be waived. So it's up to council to make that determination on the LSD. But I know that the RPL process attracts a fee, and the limited and the special consent attracts a fee. As far as LSD, it's up to council to determine what that administrative fee is going to be. Back to you, Kelly.
Thank you, Daneshwa. And Yashin, I know that you want to comment on that. And as you do, a question's also just come in, and I wonder if you could just answer that at the same time. How does the applications and portfolios get checked for quality time of assessment of applications and so forth?
Okay, Kelly, thanks for that. To respond to that, I had given SACAP a disclaimer to use my intellectual property regarding the RPL evaluation mechanism. But being out in practice, I noticed that one's not being implemented. It's the one that was withdrawn. It is a time-based one that's being implemented. Now, the time-based one, but I'm glad to hear that Daneshwar is confirming the other one, because if the one that is aligned to Bloom's taxonomy and NQF and etc. is being implemented or has to be implemented, that will ensure rigor whereby the complexity of knowledge, skills, and practice competence aligns with the NQF as well as SACAP competencies, right? But that has to be communicated, has to be transparent to the applicant as well. Then the second part is there are other things that still have to happen. How do we assure, how do we mitigate against assessor bias, etc.? So all of those things, and I'm saying before implementation, it would be best to communicate with the professionals that are affected by these things, you know. You had the second one was about, the second question you had, Kelly?
Yes. How does the applications and portfolios get checked for quality time of assessment of applications and so forth?
Okay, so so the other part to whether you're doing any kind of portfolio assessment, other than the rigorous mechanism and all of that, and alignment to proper standards, there has to be a very smart system of actually processing applications and communicating, evaluating them. So the front end, back end, all of those software systems have to be in place. Without that, it's going to be a very difficult task to handle a profession with about 10,000 members of which you could have maybe 4,000 or 5,000 applying for RPL of these things.
So what happens to all our panelists? What happens with the appeal process? As somebody's mentioned here, it costs money to appeal, apparently. Why is that? Is there somebody who'd like to tackle?
Yes.
You're very concerned to some of these questions.
Thank you, Kelly. The fees for the processes should not be a barrier. They are limited to administrative functions. And as Mr. Bastu alluded to earlier, we had recommended to council that the fees for RPL and limited special dispensation and special consent must be minimal. That's our position. We don't view, the application process being an impediment to our RPs. We would like to have as many of our registered professionals out there taking up the opportunity to upgrade to the next level or be granted permission to do specific types of buildings. So the exercise itself should not be too costly. It should be affordable even for those professionals who don't have the financial means or capacity to apply for the process. So it's going to be kept at a minimal and everyone can apply. SACAP has also ensured that we will be assisting applicants in terms of putting together the portfolio of evidence so as to ensure that the various projects that are presented in that portfolio of evidence, they talk to the various competencies, and we also guide them in terms of which are the suitable mechanism ideally designed for their circumstance. So we are really trying to engage with our RPs and assist them in that regard. Okay, so the cost will be at a minimum. Anyone can apply.
Thank you, Vusi. Another question, once the new identification of work is in play, how will SACAP ensure that this document is mandated and implemented correctly within the built environment in terms of fraudulent activity? Is there anybody that'd like to tackle this question?
Thank you, Kelly.
Okay.
Mr. Bastu, you wanna go?
I'll just speak up. I'll just hint at you. The privy seal is one of the mechanisms, and maybe you can then further discuss on that on the privy seal, Vusi, too.
Thank you, Mr. Bastu. Yes, I do agree that we have engaged with municipalities. Identification of work or validation to confirm the registration category of the whoever is submitting plans. And this really is there to ensure that we minimize persons who are practicing architecture and they use fraudulently the registration numbers of our RPs. And we also use the process to ensure that whoever is submitting plans is competent to do so and is aligned to IDoW. Yeah, so those are the means we've put in place. We've also signed an MOU with the City of Joburg so as to alleviate some of these concerns.
Just one more thing, that the registrations committee has also added an additional document that places the onus also on the client to actually do a validation of the professional to make sure that the professional is registered and is also competent or is doing work within his category of competency or category of identified work. So that document will also form part of form part of the checklist that the client will have to use to make sure that they're dealing with registered and competent professionals or professionals who are going to do work within their category of registration. So there are checks and balances that have been put in place. So the responsibility lies both with the professional and with the client as well to ensure that they take responsibility and ownership for the type of work they want and work to be delivered by the professional.
Thank you. Thank you. There seems to be a little bit of a debate around small and large projects. Would SACAP publish a better schedule or rates fees that could be applied to very small projects?
Yes, Kelly. SACAP has published the professional fees guideline, and it looks at various complexities. In terms of the fee guideline, I would refer our RPs to have a look at the latest published fee guideline, so as to appraise themselves on the various complexities which are contained therein. So perhaps if just to answer the question, the fee guideline does talk to different project complexities. Basic simple structures have a specific fee guideline, and those which are complex and require significant rational design would also have their specific fee. Thanks.
Thank you, Vusi. There's a question around more for an academic. What qualification as a draftsperson, or excuse me, with a qualification as a draftsperson, how far can you upgrade without furthering your studies, but gaining experience over the years? Yes.
Okay, Kelly, I know. All right. So I think what needs to be referenced are all the policies on RPL, the national policies. So there are DHET national policies on RPL, SACWA national policies on RPL as well. Those provide mechanisms for anybody to actually upgrade where you can provide evidence of prior learning. Okay. The important thing is to provide evidence of prior learning and have that evaluated and assessed. So that will depend on each individual's circumstances. But I think I would like to suggest to RPs is go and read the SACWA policy on RPL, read the Department of Higher Education and Training policy on RPL, and be more informed about your possibilities that these policies afford. Thank you.
Yes, Videsh.
I just want to expand a little bit on that, and it might be a problem statement, and obviously I don't have solutions, but we all need to put our heads together here. So for thousands of years, the way to move upwards, to become competent, was via mentorship. You mentored under a master and you became competent. It's less than 100 years old now that there is this move towards a formal type of study, and there's nothing wrong with that. The point being that it seems like, and it appears such that the mentorship path, which has a lot of value, and I'll come back to that, is now being totally ignored. And the point being is that a professional architect with 20 or 30 years experience doing really complex building is regarded the same as a professional architect who's done his internship of 2 years and entered the industry. Dr. Lakan and I think Mr. Basdeo was present when a question was asked a few years ago of what is the outcome of a ALS. And the answer given by ALSs was that it's a graduate and they do not produce professionals. It's industry that produces professionals. So I think the point I'm trying to make is that industry creates the professional, makes the competence. And I think that is totally ignored in the current path or the pathways and in the development. That whole argument is totally, or my argument then, or that philosophy is totally ignored and needs to be taken into consideration. Thanks.
I think I would disagree with that statement, because it's when you look at the Act, it says that for the purposes of this section, prior learning means a previous learning and experience of a learner, howsoever obtained against a learning outcome. So it said it means that you could go to university, get a formal qualification, and then go to industry and get the experience, or you can go to industry first, get the practical experience. However, your practical experience needs to be measured against an outcome required for a specific qualification. So you can go to industry first, get your experience. However, someone has to measure your experience, say, and deem you competent, and vice versa. You can go to university, get a graduate or get a diploma or whatever relevant qualification, and then industry will then give you the experience you need. However, industry can't give you all of the experience. It's something that you're going to develop. It's a lifelong learning thing. So we're saying your experience is taken into account. And in terms of SACAP, in terms of the RPL legislation, in terms of all the national legislation that addresses RPL, it actually says we must take into account your learning experience at your work-based learning experience. So to say that we only focusing on academic learning, it's not true. We do take your SACAP does take your experiences, your work-based experience as well into account. However, it has to be measured against an outcome to deem you competent. Thanks, sir.
Thank you so much. If we can go back to a focus on our youth, there's a question around if SACAP consulted widely enough, as this attendee believes that, we are becoming an exclusive environment. The new and hungry youth who want to enter this environment is going to have doors closed for them from day one, unless they can afford a 5-year study. Can somebody comment on that? Perhaps Yashin, from the academic sort of background you have. I know I keep pushing these onto you, but can you comment on that?
Yeah, starting with practice and then doing academic. I didn't grasp your question properly because I was reading another question.
No, that's okay. So they're asking really, how, unless they can afford a 5-year degree, doors will be closed for them. So did SACAP, do you think, widely consult enough, to not make this such an exclusive environment for our youth?
I think whether it's SACAP or whomever, we need to every single registered professional, every single citizen needs to understand our socioeconomic context, okay, and our global South context. So whatever frameworks that we put in place must ensure quality, rigor, excellence, and also be an enabling, and facilitative, and should be part of that healing of the socioeconomic injustice of the past. What I tend to be seeing in different contexts is that sometimes frameworks and policies are written using certain international benchmarks that may not work in this context. I think there needs to be more collaboration and more cognizance of the real challenges facing. I do work and engage with practitioners and persons in historically disadvantaged communities, in places where there aren't roads and things, and students at universities that come from these backgrounds. There's a whole wealth of lived experience that our training and education system continues to ignore. So what I'm saying is, if we continue to disregard the wealth of lived experiences through struggle, then when we're talking about excellence in education and practice and all that, we will never achieve that, because we'll achieve what is very much predefined and very entrenched as what constitutes knowledge, skills, and value. All right. So the answer to that is that we got to actually contextualize whatever frameworks, whatever policies, whatever mechanisms, and universities are still struggling with those things at the moment, and there needs to be much more concerted effort. However, I'm mentioning again, we need mutual respect. While the architect may think that the technologist doesn't have certain competencies, equally the technologist needs to understand and make the effort to find out what is it in the architect's training that makes it or her different to a technologist. And until those things become clear, transparent, and the different players make the effort to understand those things, we're still going to be pointing fingers at each other and saying, you are privileged, I am deprived. But there's a lot of understanding and respect. It's fundamental respect. If everybody can respect the other, then I think we can work together to achieve very enabling frameworks and policies.
Thank you so much.
I actually concur.
Yes, please do.
I actually concur with Yashen's last statement that we need to respect, the different categories of professionals, because currently there's a lot of disrespect, and throwing stones at one another, at each other, at each category, based on the fact that I have more experience than you and you have less experience than me. But Yashin is very correct that we need to show respect to our 4 categories, irrespective of our education, training, background, and in terms of when we look at our historical past and the contextualization, that's very important. And one of my background was the social context of the architect's profession, how it evolved historically. And I'm fully in agreement that our historical past has never been addressed, while the preamble to our constitution is very clear, heal the divisions of our past. Now, architecture is one of the professions that had job reservation in 1970, and we're saying, did we, or are we doing enough to heal the divisions of our past using architecture as a tool for social cohesion? Thank you.
Thank you so much. We do have 10 minutes left on our original time, but due to the overwhelming amounts of questions, we have extended this slightly by 15 minutes. If any of our panelists do need to leave for whichever reason, please let me know. And then if I may also ask, Daneshwa, you've been doing it earlier, and if you could assist us again by just typing out some of the answers so that we can manage to get to as many questions as possible. And the same goes to all our panelists as well. There is a question on the identification of works, obviously. Does this apply for new buildings only? What about minor additions and alterations to complex buildings? Is there someone who'd like to answer this one?
Thank you, Kelly. In terms of buildings types which are not captured in the scope of work, and the work which is considered minor, those need to be addressed with SACAP to determine whether the RP is competent to do such work. Certain minor works may be basic, simple and basic in nature. However, some works would require complex resolution. For an example, if one were to consider a renovation to a theater in a hospital, that's clearly a complex structure and would require a higher category to do such work. However, minor works, which is which is basic and simple in nature, would clearly be done by all the other categories. So in essence, minor works and alterations which are not clear whether they are done by certain categories need to be determined by SACAP. Thank you.
Just to add on to that, and Videsh, I see your hand up, and perhaps you can also assist with answering this question. Just adding to that, what is the situation on heritage buildings? If it is of low complexity, can a technologist take on such a project?
Thank you, Kelly. We have not classified buildings according to heritage significance. If and when the building meets the requirement as per category, then the RP can design such buildings. So in terms of heritage, any RP can design, but those buildings have to be applicable as per category. Thank you.
Thank you. Videsh, you wanted to comment? Add to that?
A comment, maybe as an appeal or a mechanism going forward. There are, if I have to write to SACAP every time to do a guardhouse or a small simple toilet for the corner building in a large complex structure, hypothetically speaking, I will lose the project. There's when I say, or as Vusi expanded, there are projects that are simple enough. A toilet for the truck stop that's a kilometer away from the rest of the building on a large industrial or mining site, for example. That could be a complex building or complex structure or complex site, but the proposal is small enough. There should be a simple enough rule to follow if we are going to be doing rules then. Thanks.
Just to, one of the challenges is that we've been having this boardroom discussion or this roundtable discussions for a long time. We need to take the IDoW now, put it into real time and to test it and get feedback from the entire profession and all the stakeholders. Because if we continue to engage at these platforms, we are limiting ourselves to a very limited audience. So to understand what Videsh is saying and what Dr. Yashen Lakan is saying and what Selvan or any other professional who's writing, we need to put it out there in real time now to test this document and to get the feedback and to evaluate and then to correct the document. As we said earlier, it is a living document. It's going to be continuously developed. It's going to be continuously improved. But we need to now test it out to a wider audience so we can get the feedback. We can receive and see what the challenges are, where the obstacles are, where the bottlenecks are, and how we resolve it. But if we continue to engage at a very limited level, because when you look at public participation, it is very low. Although it goes out to the entire database, it goes out to a wide range. But the only way we're going to create a compelling mechanism is to put this document out there in the public and say, right, let's see where the fault lines are. We're not saying it's a perfect document. Let's test it now. Let's find the fault lines. Let's improve the document. Because we're saying going forward, whilst we're discussing this thing, we're finding that Public Works is writing to SACAP, is asking SACAP, is this person competent? Human Settlements is writing to SACAP, asking, is this draftsman competent? Can he do this type of project? So by this document remaining a discussion document for the past 30 years, we're not able to resolve the issues in real time. We now in a phase where we have to test the IDoW in real time. We have consulted, we have heard everyone, we have engaged, we have listened to the VAs, we have listened to the ALSs. We now need to put it out there for those who are not engaging. They will now engage with the IDoW, and then they will give us feedback. We have taken an undertaking that this is a living document. CBE has also said that this document needs to be reviewed annually. So did the CC say, listen, you need to review these documents annually. We need to publish annually. So it means that we're not going to be closing the doors. As we hear the challenges, we're going to, to fix the document and improve the document. We can only improve it, but if we continue to speak at a boardroom level, we're not going to move forward. So we are saying, let's move forward. Let's test the documents. We know there's lots of documents that go out, get tested, and then the feedback in real time gets inputted, and then the documents get further improved. We know when we look at our XA has been out there, it's been tested. It's found that there's mechanisms that were not working. It's now been revised, and the same thing needs to happen to the IDoW. We put it out there, we get feedback in real time, and then we start to improve the document, because we're going to be engaging with a wider audience, with a diverse background, with diverse views, with different challenges, with different contexts, with different municipalities. So we have to put this document out there in real time now to get the feedback. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much. With this, I hear what you're saying, Daneshwa, and there's another question. I think, in order to put this into practice, I think our audience still really is a bit concerned. And how does, like somebody's just mentioned here, does this mean that plan drawing, for instance, can be a profession as long as you have experience?
Sorry, Kelly, and I just want to quickly, looking at the time, so I just want to quickly make one or two comments before the question can be answered. We've now gone through our 2 hours. Kelly, I don't know if you have mentioned and if this is going over and by how much. First comment, you will obviously confirm that. The second thing is, I quickly looked at the chat and the attendees. There are some attendees that don't, or it doesn't appear as a name, but a telephone number or an address and stuff like that. So just a general comment on behalf of or from Cybert. If you obviously need your CPD credits, we need obviously proof of your attendance. So if you have registered on the platform with some unusual and not a name, please email Kelly ASAP. Email her now if possible. And I think Kelly has dropped her email address and Zara's email address on the chat. If you can, please email the correct names and please your registration category. So attendees, please, if you do not do that and you do not get your credits or your certificate for this, I can do nothing about that. So yeah, that's just a comment I want to make. Kelly, the question you had, just as a reminder, sorry.
Yes, thank you, Videsh. So as mentioned earlier, we are going over by 15 minutes, simply just to run through as many questions as possible. And all registered attendees were asked to, of course, send their registration numbers as part of registering for today's talk. So the question before I jump to a very interesting one here, does this mean that plan drawing can become a profession as long as you have experience?
I'm not sure if it's a profession, but you'll be classified as either a candidate draftsman or a draftsperson. So the word plan drawing may not exist, but when you apply for registration at SACAP, you will be based on your education, training, and experience. If you refer to plan drawing, then it doesn't exist in terms of the 4 categories. The lowest category that you can register is a draftsperson. So draftsperson has a professional status. So yes, you'll be able to do architectural work at the category at the lowest category as draftsman with a professional status. I'm not sure any other panelists wants to add any more comments to that.
Thank you. So just going to somebody who's really set on their question being answered, and I feel that they really need some clarification, is to all panelists, what happens to us professionals that have already engaged in long-term contracts with government and private clients, whereby the identification of works now restricts the work you perform, yet you have been practicing this scope of work for 10 to 25 years? How do you now go back to your client and tell them that the professional body you are registered with now finds you unqualified enough to render these services? How would you be protected from the legalities that a client can take against you?
Kelly, who's your answer? Kelly?
Yes.
There is a mechanism in the IDoW called the transitional provision. The transitional provision allows you to continue doing the work that you have been doing until the effective date of the publication of the IDoW. When the effective date has been published, you then use the mechanism of LSD and you will continue. So whatever projects you have been doing, you submit that evidence to SACAP and you will be granted an exemption to continue doing that work. So you won't be restricted in any way whatsoever, because that that relates to PAJA and the fact that we putting you at a disadvantage. So we say, listen, there is a transitional provision. You'll be allowed to do whatever work you have contracted with your client, and you need to use the LSD mechanism to be allowed to continue doing that work.
Thank you. Yes, Dr. Yashin, yes.
Again, with the LSD, limited special dispensation, my comments previously stand. What are the criteria? Okay, the transparency, fairness, etc. But then, when you look at transitional provision, I see a kind of contradiction in the way it's written. So, according to the transitional provisions, it allows the persons out of a category to continue to practice until the effective date of publication of the identification of work policy. This one, right? Now, if you look at the preamble at the beginning of the document, they talk about the reason for this, the IDoW is to prevent potential harm to public health and safety. So by implication, when I look at the way it's written, it means persons who are deemed to be potentially harmful to public health and safety may continue performing work outside their category. It is then only upon the effective date of this policy that the said persons will now become deemed as harmful to public health and safety and the environment. So that, to me, the transitional provision has a huge contradiction in it.
Thank you so much. You know, with all these issues and concerns that our audience has, when they do reach out to SACAP, there's a question or a query here and a concern really regarding the turnaround time for getting answers back from SACAP. Is there a way that they can sort of, or to whom should they contact, or what happens with this turnaround time when we don't, for instance, have platforms such as this?
Sorry, Kerry. Good question there, and we've obviously I can't really answer that, but there's a point to be raised on the previous query or the previous question, and I believe that you can't implement the National Building Regulations or the Act 103 of 77 if the regulations and the fine details are not published together. So for example, in 1977, when Act 103 was published, it only became effective in 1981 or 1982 when the regulations were published. So you have to read the two together. So that's just the example. Coming back to the IDoW, and obviously the term here is not regulation, but the supporting documents. The supporting documents being LSD, all the transition phase documents should be published together with the IDoW for it to be a fair and for it to be implemented properly or tested properly. You cannot test the NBR without the regulation. You cannot test the IDoW without the rest of the information. And I think that's the point I want to make there. Thank you.
Can I just add some background information? So what happened, the IDoW is one committee at SACAP. We then have the education committee, and then we have the RPL committee. So the special dispensation, the limited special dispensation and special consent falls under the RPL committee, right? So the RPL committee, we as the IDoW committee has given feedback to the education committee. We have given feedback to the RPL committee. We told them these are the mechanisms we put in place to address some of the concerns of the professionals. The education committee, together with the RPL committee, together in consultation with the IDoW committee, drafted the policies. The policies are going to be discussed next week at, I've seen it minuted for discussion at the IDoW committee. It's then going to be discussed at it's going to be then presented by Mr. Vusi Pelani at the council in November. So once council approves those 4 documents or those three policy documents, together they will then approve the IDoW policy as well. So simultaneously, these things will be published early. Mr. Vusi did indicate that they're looking at publishing in the 2021 fiscal year. So we're saying once those documents are approved, they can only publish these documents once it is approved by council. So SACAP has no intention or the IDoW committee has no intention of publishing an independent, isolated document. We will, the council will approve the documents, and then it will be published for the benefit of the profession to scrutinize. And I'm sure there will be, council will decide on the procedure and the mechanisms on how this will take effect and how and when this will be implementable. But it is going to be tabled at council for approval. So just to allay any fears that we're not working in isolation, there's different committees dealing with the different aspects of this document. So when we put in this IDoW, we identified the mechanisms in line with the CC's concerns. And then we met with the education committee. We told them these are our mechanisms. We met with the RPL committee. They said, okay, this is going to be an overarching. These mechanisms are overarching and will fall under the RPL. So the entire process is managed well. The education committee and the RPL committee is constituted of academics and practitioners. So we're saying that it is not a wishy-washy backdoor kind of a committee. It is a highly structured committee with the highly skilled people and academics in that process. And we're saying that SACAP will follow the processes. We're not going to publish one document, because when you heard Vusi earlier on, when he gave the introduction in the way forward, he said that the CBE went and published a high-level document, but they excluded the fundamental information that we had presented to the CC, and this was problematic. So we as the committee, and I'm sure the council is well aware that they cannot publish one document and leave the other document out, because based on the CBE's experience, we cannot publish half a document. We need to publish a comprehensive document. So we can only publish a comprehensive document once the committee now has to make a recommendation to the council, and the council will then apply their mind, and then they will approve. Now the council also has academics sitting there as council members, so I'm sure they're quite competent to make informed decisions at that level. Thank you.
Thank you so much. When will the identification of works foresee, when will it be formally implemented by municipalities?
Thank you, Kelly. We intend publishing the policy within the 2020-2021 financial year. At this stage, we have received comments from the registered professionals. We've received comments from the VAs and anyone within the industry. We are still consulting further. We are going to have a workshop sometime in November with CBE and the Competition Commission to discuss some of the comments which were raised by the CC. Look, we intend publishing in the next year. That would be a more feasible a date. Just to concur with Mr. Bastu, I acknowledge the concerns raised by Mr. Budu and Dr. Lakan that we do need the various mechanisms in place prior to the publication of the identification of work policy. Those policies have been developed by the committee, and they sit under the overarching mechanism, which is RPL. So according to SACAP, RPL is the preferred mechanism which will see many of our RPs being upgraded to the next category of registration. I acknowledge there are challenges. We have not tested the system yet, but all those means have been put in place to ensure that once we've published, then all these other policies would be in place. And according to the Act, there is no clause that talks to publishing the other mechanisms, such as RPL, LSD, and special consent. The Act only specifies publication of identification of work as per Section 26 of the Architectural Profession Act. There's no mention there of the other mechanism. However, we will be, we will be consulting and engaging our RPs on those policies. And I do acknowledge that the concern raised by Dr. Lakan that there may be, in terms of applicability and the process to be followed in terms of when one applies and the processes, there may be a need to consult further to ensure that those policies are fair, transparent, and they ensure that the process is fair. So I acknowledge there are challenges, but we are sitting here 15 years down the line and we don't have a control mechanism for our profession, and it's a free for all. People are doing buildings as they will, and this goes against the mandate of SACAP as a regulatory body, in that we are somewhat not fulfilling our mandate. We are not protecting the public. We are not making sure that competent persons, professionals are doing work that's that's allocated for them. So I think just to echo the comments of Mr. Bastu, I acknowledge the challenges, but it's really time now that we publish this document. It's a working document. We will review as and when we progress. So I think it's time we publish it. Those mechanisms, where there are gaps or challenges, we will clear as we go along. And we are keen to, all the assistance from the panel and anyone in industry, to make sure that the mechanism work efficiently. Thank you, Kelly.
Vusi, thank you so much. We have come to the end of our discussion, and thank you so much to our attendees who have put their comments in the chat box. We really do hope that this met your objectives, as our plan was to assist you to provide clarification on the identification of works, and we thank all our participants and speakers here today. Just a reminder that if you have registered already, which of course you registered for this discussion, we did ask you to include your registration number, so no need to email Zara. We have your details. If you haven't sent this, please do send it to her before close of business day. So thank you so much for all your time and your efforts to our panelists. There are still 86 questions which we didn't get through, and Vusi and Daneshwa, I know you pointed out that this is an ongoing thing and that we can only judge with time, but we do want to ensure that our audience, we can answer some of your questions. So I will be sending the questions to all our speakers to answer in the coming week, and we'll share this together with Vusi's presentation and of course the recording of today's session. Thank you again for all your time, and we want to thank SACAP and SAIBD, of course, for their support and accreditation here today. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.